Can you see my screen?
Yes, I see your screen.
The slide. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you all for joining. We will start in a few minutes. Thanks a lot for your patience.
Yes, Veronique tries to come in, and as soon as she's accepted, she gets, well, the connection is closed. She is now in. It seems more, yeah. Veronique, you are here? No.
For you, Alexander, it works well, right? I mean, you didn't have any problem joining.
No, that as soon as I entered, my connection was very stable.
Okay.
Veronique, do you hear us? No.
That's strange because yesterday worked very, very well with her.
Yes, yes. She said to me that this is as soon as she opened her microphone that the connection is lost. Maybe she will try another one.
Oh. Good morning, everybody. We are going to give it like a minute and then we will start. Thank you very much for your patience. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining to the Space Law and Regulations workshop in the Access to Space for All series. We are starting now this webinar, but before that, I would like to give you some logistic tips. So please turn off your camera and turn off your microphone, as you can see in the slide, using the controls that you have in your screen. Also, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask them and use the chat window for that. We will be collecting questions while we are presenting. So please to write your questions there or any comment that you may have. By the end of the session, my colleague Hazuki will share a form basically to get your feedback on the webinar. So we would really appreciate that you are filling in that form for us, because it's really helpful for the statistics. But that will be towards the end of the webinar. So thank you very much, and thank you for joining this webinar on space law and regulations. We are doing this in the series of webinars for Access to Space for All. And today we have with us Yukiko Kumura and Alexandre Vallet. Yukiko is from the United Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs, and Alexandre is from the International Telecommunications Union. And they will be talking about regulations and how that can impact your project if you are planning to submit an Access to Space for All project to the different initiatives that we have in the office. So first of all, I'm going to discuss briefly a little bit the Access to Space for All initiative for those of you who are not familiar with it. That will be very quick. Then I will give the floor to my colleague Yukiko, and then it will be the turn of Alexandre for the presentation. So Access to Space for All and the office. Well, you probably know already the Nations Office for Outer Space Affairs. This is the team that is working in the office. We are not a very big team. We are kind of a small team. We are distributed among 3 different geographical locations. We have an office here in Vienna, the headquarters, and there are 2 offices corresponding to the UN Spider program in Bonn and Beijing. The structure of the office is basically correlating with the different services and initiatives that we have. For instance, my colleague Yukiko is from the Committee Policy and Legal Affairs section that is dealing with exactly that, with policy and legal affairs and with matters related to the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and related subcommittees. But we also have other sections that are related to the International Committee on GNSS and UN Spider, the UN Space-Based Information Platform for Disaster Management and Emergency Response. And then we have the Space Applications section, which is where I work, and where we implement where we are implementing in the program Space Applications, we are implementing the Access to Space for All initiative. Why we are doing all these activities in the office and in particular this series of webinar? Well, as UN entity and part of the Secretariat, we are fulfilling the Sustainable Development Goals. We are also promoting and striving to achieve and helping others to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And among all the goals that we have, there is one particular that is very important for us, which is quality education, Sustainable Development Goal number 4. All the Sustainable Development Goals have under them a number of targets, and under those targets there are a number of indicators. For Sustainable Development Goal number 4, one of the targets says that by 2030, the whole world has to substantially increase the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment, decent jobs, and entrepreneurship. And this is all what this is about. We are, through this series of webinars and through the Access to Space for All initiative and other initiatives of the office, striving to improve education related to space-related fields. That's the main reason why we are doing this. I mean, we have been mandated by the different members in the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space to further and enhance the knowledge concerning space applications, data, and technologies. In particular, Access to Space for All aims at covering the hands-on part. It provides hands-on opportunities, accessing to infrastructure or facilities that are otherwise too costly or too difficult to access to some member states. That allows to conduct a number of experiments that for some countries it's, as I said, it's very difficult. We are doing this because we have been doing theoretical activities in the past for almost 50 years that the program on space application has. And we have seen the need of moving from the theoretical side, which is still very important, to a more hands-on approach. Because you cannot, I'm sorry, you cannot learn on how to ride a bike by reading a book. You have to actually ride a bike. Of course, you can have the theoretical knowledge, and then, but then you have to have the further step, which is actually build it, actually run your experiments or implement your payload. This initiative also is fostering cooperation between different nations, because the countries that are participating and are sometimes participating together with other countries in a partnership in order to submit an application. And we are doing this because space, as you all are aware, the activities in space are increasing. I mean, that's mainly because of the reduced cost of launch, but also because there is a revitalized interest in space. And there are big things coming. And for all those things to realize, there is an increased need of skilled professionals. If you look at the statistics of last year, the space activities, space employment got an 8-year high last year. This year, because of the COVID, probably that number is not a high anymore, but that's a trend that has been sustained for 8 years and is going to continue in the future. I cannot imagine a future without space, and for that future to materialize, these skills are necessary. That's why we are doing Access to Space for All. If you look at the initiative, we have organized it in different tracks. We have the hypergravity, microgravity track, which is aiming at developing payloads that will be in space, either hosted in a space station or in another vehicle that is orbiting the Earth. Then we have the satellite development track, which is about actually developing satellites. And we have an exploration track that we are working very hard to get opportunities under the exploration track. Although, if you look at the graph, the red dots mean that we don't have an opportunity yet materialized in that area, although we deem those areas very important. But as I said, for the exploration track, there are opportunities coming up. In less than 6 months, we will have opportunities up and running there. If you look at the graph, you see also a lot of different logos. It's because of the partners that we have. This initiative is not possible without partnership. We have partnerships with space agencies, research institutes, and also private companies in order to access facilities and infrastructure that we in the office, we don't have. And those belongs to either space agencies, research institutions, or industry. That's why we are strongly partnering with them. And for us, these partnerships are very important. So that's the whole portfolio of the initiative, and the opportunities, some opportunities are open, some opportunities are currently under evaluation because we closed recently, some opportunities we are expecting to open a new round in the near future. So this is more or less the portfolio. That doesn't mean that you can apply to all those opportunities right now. But there is one opportunity that is currently open. Of all that portfolio, there is one that is currently open, which is accessing space with Vega C, which is an opportunity for launching a 3U CubeSat. And this opportunity is very much connected to the activity that we have today here about space law and regulations. The 3U CubeSat will be launched in a Vega C rocket, and the mission profile of the Vega C rocket will not depend on the 3U CubeSat, will depend on the primary payload mainly. I mean, of course, we will try to adjust with Avio, which is the partner in that opportunity, but it's not guaranteed. And the mission profile of a Vega C rocket is very interesting because it will probably deploy the CubeSat above 500 kilometers orbit, which means that it's deemed to stay in space for a long time. What we want through this opportunity is that the applicants are taking into consideration and explicitly mention how they are going to tackle and they are going to apply space debris mitigation guidelines, the guidelines for the long-term sustainability of other space activities, and international space regulation as a whole. Of course, because of launching a CubeSat, and that's why we have Alexander and our ITU colleagues are very important on that, you will have to do frequency registration and frequency allocation for that CubeSat. And that's important because, I mean, you can put it in orbit, but you have to communicate with him. So that's where the ITU regulations come into play. We are supporting those opportunities identically with the opportunity I was mentioning before about accessing space with Vega C, with a series of webinars. It's not enough, as I said in the beginning, theory is important, hands-on is very important, but theory again is very important. So we are supporting those opportunities with a series of webinars that are aiming at helping you to build the application for one of the opportunities that we have. So all the webinars that we are having will help you to get a better application. We already had a few webinars run under this series, and we are going to have more. Today we are on the space law and regulations, but we will have an Ask the Winner webinar on the 25th of December, and we will have another one on artificial intelligence and access to space on the 2nd of December. So these are things that are coming up. We also, besides the ones that are common for all the opportunities, we have dedicated ones to each of the opportunities, and we will have one in cooperation with the Center for Applied Space Technology and Microgravity in Germany. We are offering together an opportunity to utilize the drop tower that exists in Bremen, to run microgravity experiments of short duration, and that webinar will take place next week on the 18th. Again, we have the same scheme that here, but you can find all the information in our website, and I don't want to talk too much on that. You can access our website in the URL that you have in the screen, or scanning the QR code that you have now in the screen. And all these activities, as I said, they are ongoing, and we have experiments and teams that are already working on materializing the payload or the experiments that they had in mind. And this is the case of drop test. We have this year a team from Universidad Católica de Bolivia. They actually won the opportunity and are now working to implement a 3D printed extruder using a novel technique that can only be used in microgravity. And that's being done as we speak. I mean, the team is working on that, and hopefully, if situation allows, early next year, they will be testing that in the drop tower in Bremen, as I mentioned. Here you have more pictures, and one very interesting thing, and I'm not claiming that this thanks to these opportunities, of course, but the team of Olivia was also involved in creating a very low cost ventilator that is used in the country to fight against COVID, and that's because the skills that we are promoting in this program, in the Access to Space for All initiative, are can be used in a wide range of fields, mainly STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And the team in Bolivia, they have the skills. That's why they were able to apply to drop test, and they were able also to apply those skills to build this low-cost ventilator that is now being used in Bolivia. So as you can see, even if we are talking about space, those skills can be used in a wide range of other fields. And that's the beauty of the different skills that are being tackled as you are trying to put a payload or an experiment in space. We have another team that from Universidad del Valle de Guatemala, and they deployed the first satellite of Guatemala, thanks again to another initiative, another opportunity that we have under Access to Space for All, which is KiboCube. And they launched their first satellite this year. If you want to help us, I mean, of course you can apply to the opportunities, but if you think that you cannot apply or you don't feel that you are still prepared to apply to one of the opportunities, even though they are grading in difficulty, so we are trying to have opportunities of different difficulties, so everybody can access to them and build expertise as different opportunities are being used. If you think that you can help us by in the access for that to who might be interested in the opportunities. That's very important for us to get people to know about the opportunity, to actually have everybody that can to benefit from these opportunities. And that's basically all from my side. Thank you very much. And now we are moving actually to the meat of this webinar. We have our next speaker, who is my colleague Yukiko Kumura. As I said, she works in the Committee Policy and Legal Affairs section, and she's an expert on international law and we cannot be in better hands today. So Yukiko, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm trying to upload my PowerPoint. Hope you can let me know once it's up there. It might be taking time. Do you see it, Jorge?
I don't see it yet. I see a blank screen.
Okay. My computer might be slow.
Now it's loading. There is something loading. I mean, it might be also my network.
So while it's loading, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today I would like to make a presentation on the space law and regulations. My presentation will consist of two parts. Part one on a brief introduction to international space law, and part two will be what can UNOOSA offer to support implementation of international space law. And hopefully you see my presentation now. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So this is the points that I would be talking about, and as the time is unfortunately limited, I will go quickly over the slides, but I'm sure Jorge will later upload the PowerPoints on our webpage for you to go over. So let us go into the first slide. Okay. As you may know, international space law has 5 sets of UN treaties and 5 sets of principles. The most important treaty among all will be the Outer Space Treaty. It was adopted in 1967 and has been ratified by 110 countries and has been signed by 23 countries. Considering that there are 193 UN member states, it is ratified by more than half of the countries and is thought to be the constitution of space law. So there are other instruments such as resolutions, and these documents will be all included in the treaty booklet. By clicking the link below, you'll be able to find it in all UN official languages. However, as I highlighted, the LTS guidelines being adopted in 2019 has not yet been included in the treaty booklet. So I will later on inform you where you can find the original text. So let us go back to the constitution of space law, the Outer Space Treaty. In 2017, a declaration was adopted on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of Outer Space Treaty. From this declaration, you will also be able to find out that member states consider Outer Space Treaty as a key instrument. We're trying to increase adherence of the treaty by explaining the benefits of becoming a state party to it. And also in the declaration, it is recognized that the Outer Space Treaty comprises the fundamental principles of international space law. So, what are the fundamental principles of international space law? If you look at this slide, you will see that most of the Outer Space Treaty articles is actually considered as a fundamental principles. Exploration and use of outer space, principle of non-appropriation, international law and UN Charter, prohibition of weapons of mass destruction, international responsibility for national activities in outer space, international liability for damage, registration of space objects, cooperation and mutual assistance, due regard, harmful contamination, harmful interference, and information of notification. As I believe today's audience are mainly conducting small sat activities, due to the limited time frame, I'm going to focus only on the three highlighted points. International responsibility for national activities in outer space, international liability for damage, and registration of space objects. So moving on to the first point, under Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty, it is mentioned that state parties to the treaty shall bear international responsibility for national activities in outer space, whether such activities are carried on by governmental agency or by non-governmental entities. Meaning, even if you're not a governmental entity, if you're going to launch a small sat or planning to launch a small sat in the future, you have to contact your governmental authority because they will be responsible for your activity. This is one of the unique characteristics of space law. Also, it is mentioned in the article that states should be authorizing and continuously supervising the activity conducted by non-governmental entities. So please do contact your governmental authority. Now, in the treaty, there are a number of unmentioned things. For example, what is considered as a national activity? What is considered to be a space activity in your country? Who is considered to be a national? Is the activity taken in Earth considered to be space activities? This is not mentioned in the treaty. Also, it isn't mentioned in the treaty how states should authorize and supervise activities of non-governmental entities. It is purely up to each state to decide what is a national activity or how it wants to supervise these non-governmental entities. So that is why we would like you to check with your governmental authority. What we often see from national space legislation is that authorization for space activities are given in the form of licensing. And if you fail to meet the requests, some states even have sanctions to these entities. So now let's move on to the liability framework. It may be considered that small sats may have lower risks in causing damages, but if they cause a damage, regardless of their size, as long as it is a space object under the Liability Convention, states will be liable for the damages. Therefore, it is important to recognize their liability and to assure measurements for compensations. The framework itself is pretty simple. A launching state shall be liable to pay compensation for damage caused by its space objects. What is not simple is to understand the definition of the launching state. For example, launching state does not mean that your country will not be one just because it does not have a launching capability or facility. As long as you conduct a space activity, your government will be included as a launching state under the definition. Another unique characteristic of space law is that there are two tiers of liability, absolute liability and fault liability. To make it simple, if a damage occurs in Earth, the states will be absolutely liable for the damage. And when a damage occurs in space, it will be fault liability. For example, let's pretend that you had a car accident. You as a driver will have to justify your act and prove the fault of the other driver. Vice versa, this will also be the case for the other driver. And by assessing the conduct of the both drivers, the decision will be made on the fault and who compensates for what. So this is the fault liability and is applied to the damage in space. This is because both parties acknowledge the risks of space activity and has knowledge of space technology by being engaged in space activities. On the other hand, when it comes to damage in Earth, it will be difficult for someone who may not have any clue of space technology to prove the fault. Also, states engage in space activities because it is beneficial, but also they have to undermine that it is an ultra-hazardous activity that may cause great damage. So that is why when damage is caused in Earth, there is no assessing of conduct. The states will have to compensate for every damage occurred, and thus it is a victim-oriented framework. Either way, when one carries out a space activity, it has to understand that this is an activity that will benefit many people, but when there is an accident, it could have a serious damage, and the amount of compensation can quickly go up to millions of dollars. According to the treaty, states will be the one who will be responsible for their national activities and liable for the damages. But this does not mean that they cannot recourse from the operators. To ensure appropriate coverage of damage claims, states produce and in. So please check with your government authority on this point as well. I would like to move on to registration. Each state needs to have a national registry, and you will need to inform your government authority on that. And on top of it, states, once gather this information, should also inform UN on this object launched. UNOOSA, in that sense, maintains the central register. So, according to the Registration Convention, states has to register the space object by sharing the following information to the UN. Now, in regards to small satellites, I would like to highlight one point: date and territory or location of launch. So back in the early days, no one thought of developing small satellites or even piggyback launches. They only thought about launching big satellites. But lately, we have a big question. What is the definition of launch in terms of small sats? This is a question already raised in the legal subcommittee of COPOS through a questionnaire on small satellites. Because small satellites are not always deployed in orbit with rockets, Therefore, there may arise a problem in finding the appropriate launching state who procured the launch, which in terms of liability will be difficult to find the country liable when an accident has occurred. We have, up to today, received many registration on small satellites, but some states put the date of launch of the deployment of CubeSats from another orbit or sometimes International Space Station, and other states just put the launch from Earth to outer space. So the practice differs from state to state. So please check with your government and discuss who will be the launching state, what will be the information that will be registered. These things would be very important. In 2007, additional information was recommended to register. Considering the transfer of ownership in the orbit and updating whether the satellites are functional or no longer functional. So small satellites, regardless of their size, will need to register in a timely manner and often forgot to be reported that is no longer functional or even forgot to be registered at all. So please contact your governmental authority once you decide to plan and launch your small sats, so that it could be correctly registered in your government's national register, national as the UN registry to maintain sustainable space environment. And in the right-hand side, you see a model form. In our webpage, we have a model form to register a satellite. This form has to be submitted from the government to us, but I'm sure this will help you get an idea of what information will be basically requested from your government when you register to the national registry. But as I repeat once again, every government have a different national registry form, so please check with your governmental authority on the actual information you will need to inform them. For further information on registration of space object, you will be able to find from our online index and a link in this, through this link in this PowerPoint. This is one of my favorite web pages in UNOOSA, and honestly, I could spend hours and hours looking at this page since it is full of interesting cases of registration practices back from the late 1950s. And as much as I'm aware that I sound like a geek, I'm sure there are people out there that find this webpage entertaining like I do, so I recommend you to take a look at this webpage. If you need to know more about registration, please go and take a look at the guidance on space object registration and frequency management for small and very small satellites, which was jointly developed by UNOOSA and ITU. I'm sure you will be able to find most of the answers in the document. So let us go into some topic that was not considered in the 1960s, space debris mitigation. The discussion on space debris started in COPOS from the 1990s and has been continuously discussed up until today. And in 2007, COPOS space debris mitigation guidelines was adopted. This is a voluntary guideline, and there's no legal implication to it. However, some states use this guideline as a basis for authorizing space activities for non-governmental entities. Although your small sat has short lives, as long as they will be deployed by piggyback launches, it means they will be in a higher orbit and will stay there around 25 years. So please do not underestimate the space debris mitigation guidelines and look into the guidelines. Thank you. Also, I would like to highlight the recent adopted long-term sustainability guidelines known as LTS guidelines. You'll be able to find the guidelines in Annex 2 of the COPOS report A/74/20. These guidelines were discussed for 8 long years and finally has been adopted in 2019. They're not legally binding and the guidelines are often of voluntary nature. However, states are sharing their best practices and how they have been implementing the guidelines in order to maintain the stable, safe, and sustainable space environment through discussions in cohorts. So the key areas are broad, starting from national regulatory frameworks, supervision of national space activities, registration, designing operational space objects, including small sats, and of course capacity building. So please take a look at not only the guidelines, but if you have time, into the discussion held in STSC, where states are sharing their best practices regarding LTS guidelines. Now, I would like to move on to part 2. What can UNOOSA offer to support implementation of space law? I strongly hope that by now you're eager to learn more about space law, but unfortunately we do not have enough time to share all the information. So we would like to introduce you to 3 opportunities that we can provide. The first one is to simply download the space law curriculum. This is a curriculum developed for a basic course on space law that could be used in the activities of the regional centers for engineers and scientists. But it is not limited to regional centers use only. If you click on the link, you'll be able to download it in all UN official languages, and inside it, you will find useful links to know more on each. The second option is to join our annual Space Law and Policy event. Over decades, UNOOSA has been conducting space law capacity building event to a wider range of audience, including students and private entities. And this year, we plan to have an online event on the 8th to 10th December, discussing on the latest topics and focusing the discussion in the African region. The registration page has not been launched yet, but once it's there, it will appear on the top page of UNOOSA, so please check and register to join. We have also been receiving requests from member states for targeted technical legal assistance to support national space policy and national legislation. Throughout part 1, you may have noticed that I have been repeating over and over to check with your governmental authority on the procedures and regulation. Why did I have to do that? This is because states need to have a national space law and policy to supervise non-governmental entities and encourage their space activities. Therefore, we recently launched a project called Space Law for New Space Actors. The project aims to, in collaboration with requesting states, identify needs and deliver tailored advisory services in drafting national space legislation and national space policy, raise global awareness levels of the fundamental principles of international space law, support the universalization, adherence, and implementation of the key components of normative framework. This project, unlike our other annual space law capacity building events, where we have students and private entities, has a specific target beneficiaries, meaning we offer this project to policymakers and legislators in governmental and regulatory authorities who will be involved one way or another in drafting national space policy and national space law for the country. So what we offer through our project is that we support partners enhance understanding of the fundamentals of international space law and support partners implement existing normative framework. Our project is delivered in each requesting country in a 12-month period, In stage 1, we conduct a baseline analysis and research on the partner country, in particular on its current space activities, space policy, and involved authorities. In stage 2, we will develop together with the partner country on a program of the on-site event tailored to the partner's country's national needs. And in stage 3, we will distribute an e-learning ID so that the participants can complete the e-learning before the event and have fundamental understanding of space law, so that when we have the actual on-site training, we can concentrate more on the case studies reflecting the partner country's situation, rather than just listening to presentations. So currently, the dedicated e-learning is under production in English, French, and Spanish by the generous support of Government of Luxembourg and Chile. After the on-site event, there will be a follow-up stage, stage 4. We will conduct impact evaluation and also submit a report to the partner country refining the observations. So given the COVID-19 situation, a lot of events were postponed, but we successfully completed the Chilean event last month with wonderful feedbacks, and we're planning to have 2 more events. One in December for the African countries and one in 2021 for the ASEAN countries. For the African countries event, information note has been sent to all permanent missions of the African countries, and the registration is still open. Other than the listed activities here in the slide, there are a number of other planned activities in 2021, and once these are confirmed, it will be updated in our webpage. So I would like to once again highlight that awareness of and adherence to international space law is becoming more important than ever, as we have new space actors joining space activities, and we need national space law to foster responsible national space activities to maintain sustainable environments in space. And last but not least, our space law for New Space Actor project is delivered through contributions of donor countries such as Government of Luxembourg, Government of Chile, Secure World Foundation. And recently we have received Government of Belgium as one of our new donors to this project. And we would like to ask for countries to be donors to this project so that we can provide such legal assistance to those states who are seeking for support and to help maintain sustainable environment in space. So, yeah, I think for further information on the project, the upcoming technical advisory mission, please contact myself and I will be happy to answer all questions. I think I skipped, yes, this will be the email address and I'm happy to receive any contacts from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yukiko, for your presentation. A lot of information. I was really learning a lot.
Sorry, I had to run down because 30 minutes was not enough for space law.
No, it has been really interesting, and tackling points like liability and the registration of objects in outer space, and also the national responsibility and the supervision of space activities. I mean, all those points are very relevant to access to space for all, and I hope the participants in the webinar can take those into account. And also how to engage with the office on these activities. Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate it. And now we have my dear colleague, Alexander Vallet. He's chief in the Space Services Department in the Radio Communications Bureau of the International Telecommunications Union to talk about frequency. Alexander, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So I hope that you can see my screen, my presentation.
Yes, it's there. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So thank you very much for the invitation, Jorge, and welcome also to all the participants. So I'm Alexandre Vallée, the Chief of Space Service Department in the ITU. And at the beginning, I propose to describe to you what is ITU. So ITU is a United Nations specialized agency for information and communication technologies. We are located in Geneva, and we have 193 member states. But we have also some members from the industry or from universities, because we have a different kind of membership. So we have membership for member states, but also for industry and even for academia, what we call academia members, that is to say people from universities. If you are interested by joining the ITU, you can look at the various link that I have mentioned. So let me enter into the substance of the presentation. This will be in two parts. I will first explain why we need a regulation for spectrum and orbits, and then I will explain briefly file a satellite network to ITU, that is to say, how to request some frequencies for your project. So first, a little bit of background. Why do we need international regulations for radio frequency spectrum and satellite orbits? Well, this is quite simple. It's simply because radio waves do not know about borders, political borders. They simply propagate without stopping at any border. And also, concerning the satellites and outer space, the need for international regulation is directly, in fact, stemming from the treaty on the outer space that you have been given a presentation about. Since there is no national sovereignty in space, there is no appropriation in space, the use of resources in outer space is based on international law. And when it comes to radio frequency spectrum, radio frequency resources, well, the international law is codified in a treaty called the Radio Regulations that is managed under the framework of the International Telecommunication Union. So because of this absence of national sovereignty, we have international rules to make sure that the operation of various satellites in space do not create interference between themselves, radio signal interference, during their operations. And I will try to explain how. So to do that, what we have is a treaty called the Radio Regulations that you can see on the slide. It's now more than 2,000 pages. Initially, it was not a treaty for space. Nowadays, it's not only a treaty for space, it's really a treaty for all radio communication activities, but it also includes all the space radio activities. So just for you to know, as a kind of history, the first version of the radio regulation has been adopted in 1906. And at the time, it was only regulating two frequencies. And it was the two frequencies for maritime safety to send distress calls and SOS. Now it regulates all radio spectrum between 8.3 kilohertz and 3,000 gigahertz. And there are now more than 2,000 pages of regulation. So as you see, in 114 years, we have grown quite well. So the main purpose of this intergovernmental treaty is to harmonize the use of spectrum so that economies of scale can be achieved, to create a regulatory certainty for the industry using radio frequencies, so not only satellite, but also terrestrial, scientific, maritime, and et cetera, et cetera. And finally, we do that by creating a certain form of certainty, because our treaties are always decided and signed by consensus. We don't generally use voting to adopt our treaties, so that more countries can join and can apply the radio regulations. So what are the main mechanisms in the radio regulations to ensure a control of radio interference, to avoid that satellites interfere with each other and prevent the transmission of their useful data? In fact, we have 5 mechanisms in the radio regulations. The first one is what we call the allocation of frequency bands. So what we do is that we take the radio frequency spectrum and we cut it in small pieces that we call frequency bands. And in these frequency bands, we say that you can only use these bands for certain type of applications that we call radio services. By segmenting the spectrum like that, we ensure that there is compatibility among the various uses of the same frequency band. The second mechanism is that we establish power limits. So it's much more about how to coexist within the same frequency band. So we harmonize the types of use, but still these various types of use may interfere each other if they have not proper technical limitation. And this is the reason or the rationale for establishing some power limits to certain applications. Then the most important, very important mechanism is what we call coordination. So when you want to share the same frequency bands as other radio systems, we have an international mechanism ensuring that all the ITU member states that support satellites projects discuss with each other to ensure that the operation of the satellite does not interfere with the others that are already operating. The fourth mechanism is the necessary consequence of the coordination to ensure to know with whom you have to discuss in the coordination process. We need to record all the frequencies that are used on board satellites, and we do that in a database that we call the Master International Frequency Register. So you have seen that UNOOSA has an international register of all the objects in space. In ITU, we have a register, an international register, an international database of all the radio frequencies used in space. And finally, the fifth mechanism, which is more for national administrations and national regulators to implement, is a monitoring. So the regulators monitor that the spectrum is used according to the intended use. So these five mechanisms, taken all together, ensure that the radio frequency in space can be used and can be shared among various systems, while ensuring that each system can operate without any radio interference that would prevent the correct transmission of data. Which leads us to the second part of this presentation, where I will show to you, I will try to explain the mechanism and the steps to file a satellite network to ITU. So what is the filing to the ITU? In fact, an ITU satellite filing or satellite network is simply a request for using certain frequencies in space. And I will try to explain how to do that. So in this presentation, I will focus on the case of non-geostationary satellites, so either CubeSat, SmallSat, or even larger non-GSO. But I will not really speak about the GSO case, the geostationary satellites, because this is less close, or this is less relevant for the Access for All space initiative. So the first step when you do your satellite project is to identify the correct radio service, the correct frequency, the correct region in the table of frequency allocation. So let me show you. So this is a slide showing you the three ITU regions, the three ITU radio regions. So we have region 1 in, so basically all Europe, Middle East, Africa, and including the Russian Federation in Europe. Then you have region 2, which corresponds to the Americas, including Greenland. And region 3, it's all the Asia-Pacific region. So this divide of the world in 3 radio regions is important because the radio allocations, the frequency allocations in the radio regulations are made by region. So here on this slide, you have two frequency bands. You can see that, for example, in the frequency bands 18.1, 18.4 gigahertz, the allocations are worldwide. They span the 3 regions, and they are the same in the 3 regions. So we call that a worldwide allocation. However, in the frequency bands below, 17.7, 18.1 gigahertz, you can see that the allocations are different according to region. This is when countries cannot achieve worldwide harmonization. Sometimes it happens. So at least they try to achieve regional harmonization, and that's already something. Why is it important? It's important because not really so much for the satellite, but for the ground segment. If you are planning to operate your ground segment in one region, you need to be sure that the allocations exist in this region in order to be able to operate your ground segment. If you use, for example, I don't know, we'll take the example of the broadcasting satellite here in region 2. So you are using a broadcasting satellite service on your satellite, and you can only have ground segment in region 2 in the Americas. So if you are located in Africa or in Asia, then it will not be practical for you. So this is an important point. So the first things to do is to select the appropriate frequencies that you want to use for your CubeSats. Then the second part is that you will have to look at the implication of using these frequency bands. So depending on the frequency bands, the access of the to these frequencies through the ITU mechanism will be either through a coordination approach or a planning approach. So planning, I will not discuss it at all today because this is only for certain types of geostationary satellites. So you will not really be concerned with it. So I will focus on the coordination approach. So when we have done that, the second thing you have to do is to gather all the characteristics of the satellite network you want to submit to ITU. So basically, to do that, you have to go to the radio regulations and look at the Appendix 4 of these radio regulations. And this Appendix 4 contains the list of all the data that are necessary to make a submission. So it's mainly regulatory and technical data related to your satellite. And I show you here just one page of the Appendix 4. So you have the detailed list of everything that you need to gather. So before any submission to ITU, you really need to make sure that you have these informations at hand so that you can use our software to create the submission and to send it to ITU. When you have selected the appropriate frequency band you want to use, second step, you have gathered the necessary technical information. You need to check, according with the radio regulations, whether the way you plan to use your satellites complies with the power limits that I was mentioning before, and that are also contained in the radio regulations. So there are several kinds of power limits. These limits depend on the frequency band you are choosing, and they are contained mainly in Article 21 or Article 20. These power limits, they are here to ensure that all satellites can coexist, and therefore they cannot be exceeded. So if you design a satellite that needs to exceed these values, then you are in trouble because you will never be able to get a frequency registration, and therefore to use. You will never be able to use these frequencies. So this is also a thing to do before submitting the request to ITU. Finally, the last but one step is sharing the orbit spectrum. So this is the core of the, I would say, submission. So what you will do is that you will submit to ITU the request for frequency. So you will submit the satellite network filing, and we have tools that are fully downloadable from our website. You can contact us if you want more information about the tools to be used. What is important, however, is that it's not you as a project manager that directly the network filing. You will create the filing and you will ask your notifying administration, that is to say the administration of the country in which you want to go through for submitting the satellite to ITU. So you need to choose one country. Normally, it is a country where you live or where your company is headquartered or where your university is headquartered. And you need to ask the administration of this country to submit officially the filing to ITU. When this is done, what you will send us and what we will publish is a document that is called an advanced publication of information, listing the various characteristics that I mentioned in step 2. So this will be published internationally, and as such, all the other countries in the world will see that you have such a project. Because they will see that you have such a project, they will be able to tell you within 4 months after the publication of this document whether they see a potential issue or potential interference problem with your project. So they will contact your administration and they will tell, you have published this description of the project. Well, we would like to discuss more because we are also using the same frequency and the orbit is not very different. So maybe we should make more technical simulations to make sure that it works. After this period of comments of 4 months, the ITU will publish a second document. It's called an API-B, listing all the countries that have made a comment. And then you will enter into a series of bilateral discussions or negotiations with these countries to make sure that your new project does not interfere with their existing satellites. Generally, you will make some adjustments to your characteristics, and this modification, these adjustments will eliminate the risk of interference with other satellites. So it's important not to submit the frequency request too early, because if it is submitted too early, you will not know, for example, the characteristics that are needed to make the submissions. But it's important also not to submit it too late in the project, because you may have to modify certain characteristics of your satellites following the discussions with other countries. So either you have the flexibility to change it in the satellite itself, but if not, it's better to make the frequency registration a little bit in advance. When you have finalized the negotiations and appropriately modified the characteristic of your system, you are sending to ITU the second document, which is called the notification, which contains the final characteristics. The ITU records these final characteristics in the master register, the international database of all frequencies used in space. And then you have to bring into use these frequencies to ensure that they are actually used in space. And take care, you have only 7 years between the API and the notification. So normally this leaves you ample time to make your negotiations. It's important to say it's a maximum of 7 years. There is no, it's not a minimum time to conclude the discussions. Normally, you can conclude all this process for a simple project like CubeSat in approximately 12 to 18 months. When you are recorded in the master register, then your satellite has also received some international recognition, and therefore the newcomers will have to discuss with you in order to ensure that there is no interference to you. So this is the fundamental process to get first the possibility to use your frequencies, and then the possibility to continue to use your frequency without interference from newcomers. So the key issues about successful negotiations is that there are many filings, there are many requests nowadays. Space is becoming more and more popular. So don't underestimate the fact that you need to devote some time of your project to this issue. Otherwise, you won't get the necessary regulatory approval for launching. And you have also to, however, because there are many filings, you have also some time to make a little bit of research on the web and so on to see if really all the comments are, I would say, for real satellites. So, for example, there may be a project that is not very at early stage or not very well in development. It should not be your priority. Your priority is really to make sure that you don't create interference to existing satellites in orbit or to projects that are going to launch very soon or that are in good advancement of their manufacturing. The final step, as I mentioned a little bit previously, is to enter into the master register. So this is done through the notification that I just described. And just for you to know, we have already more than 6,000 satellite networks registered. This is due to the fact that these satellite networks, the way we do it in ITU, there is not one satellite network for one satellite. You may have multiple satellites behind single satellite networks, but you can also have several satellite networks operated to a single satellite. So all these data are online, available online in our ITUR website. So if you want to have a check. Just to summarize and to try to conclude, what I would like you to remember is that in space, there are two natural limited resources that have to be globally shared and that are globally regulated. This is the orbit and the radio frequency spectrum. The legal framework for regulating these radio frequencies in space, this is the ITU Constitution and Convention, which are basic instruments, but more importantly, the radio regulations, the basic treaty. And we have two other documents, the rule of procedure and the recommendations that give you some additional information how to apply the radio regulations. So just to mention, this presentation will be made available online on the UNOOSA website. And at the end of this presentation, we have put some annexes with a number of links to download all these documents. Radio regulations, rule of procedures, recommendations, you can all get them online on the ITU website and you can download them. So next point to conclude, to remember that there is 5 steps to register satellite frequencies, identify the appropriate service and frequencies, gather all the characteristics of the satellite network to be submitted in IT to ITU, check if your satellite project is compliant with the power limits and the other regulatory limits contained in the radio regulations. Then submit to ITU your request, discuss with potentially affected administrations, and notify, finally, the characteristics for entry into the master register. So it seems a lot of things, but in fact, it's not so difficult if you do it step by step and properly. Each step, we can help you. Do not hesitate to contact us at either at this email, brmail@itu.int. This is our official email address. You can also contact my colleague Véronique Glaude, who is representing ITU to the COPOS, or myself, and we have put our email address on this presentation. And really, that's really my advice. If you have a question, please ask us. For us, it's really often very easy to answer because we are accustomed to these problems. And for you, it will avoid that you spend hours looking at an answer that may be very easy for us to provide. I also would like to inform you about a close event that is called the ITU World Radio Seminar. This is a seminar that is going to start on the 30th of November. We will have 2 sessions each day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. They are identical. They are just here to accommodate different time zones. And in this ITU World Radio Seminar, you will get a more detailed presentation of all the aspects that I have covered in this presentation. So if you're interested, you can look at the link at the bottom of this slide, and you can look at the program to see if there are some sessions that could be of interest for you. And do not hesitate to register. The first week is open to all. The second week is a more dedicated week for exercise, for on-zone exercise for our members, our membership. But the first week is open to everybody, and it contains a lot of presentations, much more details than what I have done this morning. So finally, do not hesitate to contact us, either at the previous email address, the generic email address, or at our addresses. Email addresses that are shown here. So I'm Mr. Vallée, and my colleague is Véronique Glaude, and we will be happy to assist you if in your project. Thank you very much. Then the annexes you can get there when you go on the website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexander. It's really a pleasure to have you here. It has been a very comprehensive presentation and tackling all the points. And I think one of the key messages that of your presentation was that it takes time. I mean, this process, if you are working on a CubeSat, it takes time. So don't underestimate the time that it's going to take for you to actually register your frequency, because that's an important part of the process. And you will not be able to launch without that. Thank you very much. That has been really great. And now I'm going to move to the questions on the chat. I've seen that there have been a lot of activity there, which is really great. Really appreciated. So let me try to get to the first question that was posted in the chat. So first question was, if country A launches a satellite from country B launch pad, who will be responsible for damages caused by the satellite? That goes, I think, for Yuki. Yukiko, please.
May I just quickly share a slide, because that might be easier for all the participants to understand what the issue is, because I skipped intentionally the dispute settlement slides, and I have one from another part which I can quickly show you. Is it up on? Can you see the slides?
Yes, we can.
It's loading. It's loading.
Okay. I think I have to go to. Okay. I hope you see my slides. I also see that there are relevant questions related to dispute settlement and investigations and who's liable and such. So let me just quickly share the dispute settlement slides. So when there's a state suffering damage, claim compensation to the launching state should be made through diplomatic channels no later than 1 year following the date of the occurrence of the damage. And if there's no settlement through the diplomatic channel, then there will be a claims commission established, and the claims commission should give a decision no later than 1 year from the establishment. That is the dispute settlement procedures mentioned in the Liability Convention. And I noticed that there's a question, So what happens if there are multiple launching states? And these days, it's more often that there are multiple launching states. So when there's a multiple launching state, every launching state is liable. It's just to pick which one. And the answer is whichever. It is thought to be best to select a state which has the ability and which is willing to compensate you the damage. And I would say a launching state which has paid compensation for damage shall have the right to present a claim for indemnification to other participants in the joint launching. So the multiple launching state will be co-liable for the damages. And this is why the treaty aims for a speed procedure in order to save the state suffering damages. And also this connects to the registration process, and the country that would register the satellite will be the most easy to identify as a launching state. So I would say you either contact the state, you look in the online index on our webpage who made the damage, you identify who's the the state party, and you contact this person, you contact through the diplomatic channel and discuss that. That is and also you might, but you don't necessarily have to contact the registry state. You can also contact any other launching state. That is my answer to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Yukiko. That's very clear. I think it was clear for all, and thank you for sharing the information in the screen. That has been very useful. I think I skipped one question that was coming before this one. So the question is the following. Does registration of space objects include identification of debris objects?
Okay, I think that's also a question to me.
Yes.
If I know that the audience here are engineers rather than lawyers, so I'm sure you're more familiar with spacetrack.com, discuss all these space trafficking tools online, and these online tools has identified number of space debris from you could say from this from which launch this debris was created from, or which space object that paint or the nail came from. This could be more or less identified from other spacetrack.coms by USA and discussed by ESA. And it depends on the state's practices whether to register this to the UN registry. But I would say that recently we're noticing more countries that are willing to register space debris to the UN registry. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiko. So in short, is basically that the register of objects launched into outer space is objects that have been launched, not necessarily small pieces of debris. Is that what I take?
I mean, every object that is launched into space could be registered, and it would be nice to maintain a stable, sustainable environment. It is nice to register space debris. And after the adoption of LTS guidelines, I see many states starting to register space debris as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the clarification. So next question, it's coming from Uskorev. Are there some activity to establish international commission of damages to investigate damage and make decision?
Yes, so as I referred to the dispute settlement procedures, once a diplomatic channel has set up through a government to discuss on the damage claims and that was failed, you can establish a claims commission. However, what I want to highlight is that we have not so far up until today, there was no compensation per se made in relation to the liability convention, and so far we have not had any claims commission established. Thank you.
Thank you. That was again very clear. We have another question from Singi. Again, I think that there are a lot of questions on debris and liability. That was a topic that was really attractive to the audience. Where can a launching organization buy insurance against damages? Can you name a few organizations or companies or agencies that sells such space insurance?
Honestly, I hesitate to promote insurance companies, so I will not name them. But if you just Google satellite insurance, you will find lots of names on the internet. So please do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another question from Uskorev is, it's a big problem if parties of an accident are government spacecraft or one is private. Another from government side, how to get compensation? I'm not sure that I get the question, so I think there is an accident between a government and a private spacecraft, or from another government, how to get the compensation?
Yes, so simple. Governments are responsible for every activity their nationals will be conducting. So the private entities, if causes, it will go into who's the responsible government, and it will be a discussion between the government and government. Thank you.
That's again very, very clear. We are getting a lot of questions coming in. That's really great.
Thank you for the interest. I'm so happy.
Another question from Ivan. Thanks for the presentations. A question on registration. What if a country does not have a national space law and I want to apply to access to space? Maybe there is no national register of frequency coordination. Who to talk to? I think that question goes to both. I give the floor to Yukiko first and then Alexander.
In terms of registration, I mean, not having a national space law should never prevent you to apply to access to space. Once you apply and get selected, as we work closely with our member state, we can start discussing on how to register and how to set up a national registry. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may add to that, just a small point. We had cases where there were countries that applied to access to space and didn't know, well, institutions in countries and didn't know how to register. And thanks to that application, the national register was established that was put into contact with the so it's a process that is really interesting. If you apply, you will be discussing with us and we will be helping you on that part. So thanks. Alexander, please. You are mute.
Sorry. So yeah, just to mention for radio frequency registration, in each country there is a contact point to ITU. I will share it on the chat. So here on this web link, you have the list of all the notifying administrations to ITU. So the 193 member states. If you click, you have the contact addresses for each member state. So each member state is able to register frequencies. There may not be national law for that, but generally it's not really a hurdle because what they need to do is not so much at the beginning to apply nationally, but simply to apply the radio regulations that all of them have signed. And therefore, the first step does not necessarily require a national law. Of course, in the second step, if you have a project, they will start discussing how to license these frequencies to you. But it should not be an impediment. You can start an international process without a national law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander, and thank you very much for the list of national contact points. I think that would be very useful and for the audience here. Thanks a lot. Another question, if in the process of leaving the orbit, an object being a worker or being working or garbage damages a working object, who and how will it settle and investigate, establish the degree of responsibility and calculate the damage, and how to make the culprit admit guilt? I think that has been partially answered in previous questions. Maybe Yukiko, you may want to drop there a summary line for that question, but that goes to liability convention. You're mute.
Yes, so as I said before, it would be according to the liability convention. You would have to make open a diplomatic channel to the other government that you had, whether you're a victim or the other way around. You have to open a diplomatic channel and otherwise set up a investigation commission. As I'm not an engineer, I would not know how to calculate, but I'm sure in the Claims Commission there will be an expert that will be able to identify such and such technicalities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, don't forget that on those commissions you have experts that are able to determine that, and there will be discussions on that topic. So discussion will be very, very much scientific and technical for estimating the culprit. A question from Anne. What is the obligatory status, e.g. registration, for a country that has not signed the treaty?
Thank you for that question. I think that also comes to me. So in 1961, General Assembly Resolution 1721B was adopted, and countries who are not state parties to the registration convention can register to the UN by using this resolution as a vehicle to register to our UN registry. And there, on our webpage, there is a model form dedicated for those countries who are not state parties to the convention and who are willing to register the satellites. So this is, please check our webpage. Thank you.
Just note an additional point for the access to space for all opportunities. When we are talking about launching a small satellite, we are asking for registration, no matter whether you are party or your country's party or not of the registration convention, because there are mechanisms actually to register the satellite, even if the country is not part of the registration convention. So that's a very important part for us. Another question, and this goes to both to Yukiko and Alexandra. Thanks, UNOOSA and ITU. I have a question. Where can I consult whether my country has a national space legislation? Is there a place like the register where you can find whether a country has or does not have space law and policy?
Okay, so let me first share a link through a chat. I hope it works. We have a web page having collections of national space law, so you can first check here, but these collections are dependent on the states to report us on the national law. So this is not up to date. We're still waiting for countries to let us know and inform us on the updated national space law. So if you can't find your country's name here in the collections webpage, then you could probably, I would encourage you to find the governmental authority in charge of space activities and contact them for the details. That will be my answer.
Yeah, concerning
Alexander.
yes, concerning national frequency registration. Well, either this is included in the generic telecommunication law of your country. So in many countries now there are a kind of general provision about the telecommunication in the telecommunication law that deals with who is in charge of communicating with ITU in your country and so on. Very often, these telecommunication laws are very generic. They do not specify whether it's for satellite or for terrestrial or for anything, but they are generic, so they cover both. In many countries as well, especially, for example, if this is the first satellite or if there is only 1 or 2 satellites in the country, the telecommunication law is generic enough to not need a specific section on satellites. So basically, what the administration will do is that they will look at the general principle of the telecommunication law and apply it to your case, but without enacting a complete law on that, because they have signed the radio regulation, which is already binding to them, and they don't really need more. So there is not necessarily a special law on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And then we stay with you because the next question goes to you. Who and how to make the decision about whose radio is primed to have and use his frequency? So I guess it's about who is first allocating frequency.
Yeah. So really the satellite, the frequency bands or the frequency range you want to use is really a decision from the project. It depends on what you want to do with your satellite. And depending what you want to do, you will select, I would say, a frequency range. That is to say, okay, I want to operate between, I don't know, 100 megahertz and 150 megahertz. When you have selected this frequency range, you can consult the Article 5 of the radio regulations and find the appropriate frequency bands that you can use that are allocated for satellites in this range. When you have done that, then you end up with multiple options. For example, you are quite open about the frequency range, so you may have multiple options. To determine the best option, then it's better to consult your national regulator for frequency. Or if you wish, you can also send us an email to ITU to better understand the different options and what are the possibilities and what should guide your choice. But fundamentally, this is more the frequency range is really a choice of the satellite project, because we cannot decide for you what you want to do exactly in your satellite.
Thank you very much. That was clear. And I'm going to jump a couple of questions because they are related. The next one is related also to radio frequency. It's coming from Samer Lawar. If our satellite uses radio amateur frequencies, do we need to submit a filing to ITU?
So yes, you need to submit a filing to ITU. The point, however, is that so the process is exactly as I described in this presentation today. However, there is an interesting addition, I would say, for amateur frequencies, and I'm sharing the link on the chat. The International Amateur Radio Union is taking the lead to coordinate globally the frequencies. So you remember step 4 when I was mentioning that you need to negotiate or discuss with other satellite projects. In fact, if you are using amateur frequencies, and then the International Amateur Radio Union will do that for you. You can apply to them, and you can look at the website to know how to do it. And if they find that your application is indeed an amateur satellite, then they will do the negotiation for you. So it will help you a lot to use these radio frequencies, but you still need to do the ITU process. Yeah, just maybe just a final addition. To apply for a radio for an amateur frequency, you need to be a radio amateur. That is to say, a commercial company cannot apply. And if you are from a university project, you can apply, but only if you get a radio amateur license.
Thanks, Alexander. I think that's very useful because some of the satellites that we are getting applications for under Access to Space for All actually fall under that category, and I've seen some of them applying to IARU, the International Amateur Radio Union.
Yeah, that's really a good idea, and that's certainly an advice that I give.
That's great advice. Thank you very much. Another question coming from Anne. Is there a possibility of a country without national space law still be considered liable for damage caused by its citizens? And this question goes to Yukiko. For example, a citizen of country A owns a satellite and launch at country B. So, Yukiko.
I am the question again. Yes, it doesn't matter whether you have a national space law or not. It matters whether you are party to the Liability Convention and party to the Outer Space Treaty. So if you are, you will be liable. And yes, that would be my answer. It doesn't matter if you have a national space law or not. As long as you're a state party to the treaties, you'll be liable.
Another question, I think, on liability. Assuming a small satellite launched by a developing country breaks down in space, and the country does not have the technology to bring the satellite back to Earth and burn up safely in the atmosphere, what assistance is available to help the country deal with the issue?
And I'm assuming that also comes to me. So, as I mentioned earlier, all post-space debris mitigation are of voluntary nature. But if the state is willing to comply but doesn't have the capability of deorbit or reorbit, then I believe this is an area where international cooperation should be active to support other countries in terms of technology. And I'm sure if this state does not have reorbit or deorbit capability, I assume that country would also not have launching capability. So this country may want to consult the other launching states on what support they can get in terms of complying to debris mitigation guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very clear. A question that I think it goes a little bit to both. Does notifying admin for the ITU filing could also be liable for the satellite?
Well, this is not automatic. There is no legal link between the administration sending the frequencies to ITU and the administration registering the satellite and therefore being liable for it. But it may be both. It may be different. There is no automatic link between both of them.
Yeah, Yukiko, I don't know if you would like to.
So if I may add, so launching state is there are 4 types. Launching state which launches a space object, state which procures the launching of a space object, state from whose territory a space object is launched, and state from whose facility a space object is launched. So I don't know whether a country that doesn't have anything to do with any of the 4 categories be asking for a frequency. So I'm just assuming, but I would say if a country has will do a ITU filing, it usually falls under the four categories of launching state. However, if as an exception they don't fall under the 4 launching state categories, then there might not be it might not be liable. It's about looking into each case, and as Alexander has said, there's no automatic link. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to simplify, normally for the projects that will apply for this initiative, it should be quite simple. Both administration will be the same normally, because when there are two different administrations, it's because of a commercial complex, I would say, arrangement with subsidiaries and so on. But it should not really affect this kind of project.
Thank you very much. I think that has been very clear. Thank you both. Another question, we are passing a little bit the time limit, so if speakers allow me, we will continue until we have exhausted the questions. Thank you, Mr. Valette, for your presentation. You mentioned non-GSO satellite systems and the ITU RR edition 2020. Could you please also refer to Resolution 35 Final Acts WRC 19 and its annexes on how is this document important to the deployment of satellite systems in LEO? That's a very specific question.
Yes, that's coming from a specialist. I know, Mr. Taitu. Yes, the resolution, in fact, deal with the deployment milestone. It's more intended to mega constellations, to regulate mega constellations and to regulate really small CubeSats or small satellite projects. The main objective of this resolution is to make sure that when you have started the deployment, after the 7 years that I mentioned in my presentation, you continue the deployment at a regular pace so that there is no, I would say, warehousing of spectrum without actual use. So it's really a resolution that is here to guarantee the actual use by satellite of the resources, the frequency resources they are asking for and they are registering. For you, formally speaking, most of the projects in this initiative I don't think will be subject to this resolution, because it applies only in specific frequency bands, mainly used by, as I mentioned, mega constellations. So it's mainly Ku and Ka band and above. Normally, small sat are not going to, at least at the beginning, are not going to use this kind of frequencies. But if it happens, then yes, you will be subject to it. But also for your project, it will be simple, because the idea is that you will launch one satellite. So your constellations, I would say, is not the mega constellations. When you have launched your satellite, you have completed the deployment of your system, and therefore the obligation under this resolution will be achieved. So there should not be a lot of difficulty for your initiative with regard to these points, which is the reason why I didn't mention it in my presentation.
Another question that I skipped before, coming from Ivan. What do I do if there is interference in the signals I get from my satellite? Who to contact? Who investigates the origin? I think, Alexander, you have replied, but that may be interesting for the rest of the.
Yeah, this is an important question. So if you get interfered and you cannot receive anymore the data, the first things to do, of course, is to investigate that this is not a technical glitch or a technical problem in your system. But when you are quite sure that there is no problem in your system and it really comes from the outside, this is radio interference, then you should contact your national frequency regulator. And this regulator has some mechanism in place to investigate this interference case and to locate the origin of this interference. And when the interference will be the interference origin will be located, the regulator will contact the regulator of the other country from which the interference is coming, and they will solve the matter together. Interference may also come from another user in your own country. So, for example, your receiving antenna can be interfered by a terrestrial station in your country, and then your national regulator will also deal with that and will handle it.
It's great to know, and the list that you put before in the chat, that comes very handy to get in touch with the national point of contact. Another question from Anne. Is there any cross-reference between ITU filings and UNOOSA registration?
not again, not there is no legal link. But of course, you can, if you wish, you can access both database, and you can start playing with making links. As I mentioned, it may not be completely obvious because several satellite, what we call the satellite networks, that is to say a set of frequencies. One satellite can operate different satellite networks. So for example, you can file a satellite network in Ku band, a satellite network in Ka band, and for certain reason you file it separately to ATU. But on the satellite, this is both Ku and Ka band payload. So one satellite will cover two networks, and similarly, one network can cover more than one satellite. This is not very frequent for non-GSO satellites, but for GSO, yes, it is very frequent. For example, all the DTH position where big satellite operators are broadcasting TV, they generally put 2 or 3 satellites at the same positions to have redundancy. But in ITU, there is only one ITU filing, and these 3 satellites operate within this filing. So there is no legal link. It's possible to make some links, but then you can have fun with it, I would say.
Thank you. I don't know, Yukiko, if you would like to add anything else. If not, yeah, it's a question that we get often, and the answer for Alexander, it's very clear. Actually, the two registers are serving different purposes. So that's why, I mean, playing with trying to make the match, it's probably an interesting game to play, but be aware that there is no one-to-one relationship there because of the different purposes they are serving. What happened to the launching satellite which does not register with the UNOOSA? Does UNOOSA have the ability to make sure all the space objects were registered?
Thank you. I think that question comes to me. So if you visit our webpage, the online index of our outer space objects, you will be able to filter all the space objects registered and non-registered. So and you can also filter by country, which country hasn't registered this satellite, which country that has registered this satellite. You can find everything in our online index. To the non-registered space object, what we do is we mildly and unofficially approach the government in order to ask them that enhance the registration of space objects. And it happens often that some states doesn't recognize that they had a satellite that wasn't registered just because the private entities, sometimes academia or private companies, didn't inform the government. So that is why I would like all of you to try and approach your governmental authority on your plans on space activity, because they have to be responsible for your space activities. Thank you.
Yep. If I may just add something from the frequency side, if you wish, ITU or UNOOSA, we are not a police of member states. We serve the member states, so we don't. What we do is exactly what Yukiko says: is that we inform them, we contact them, but we are not a police. However, as a private entity or as a private person, take care that there are national rules and national legislation that may involve severe penalties if you don't register properly your space activities, either for the object or for the frequencies. What I know, at least for frequencies, is that in many countries, using a frequency without an appropriate license from the member states is often subject to a very high fine in the thousands of euros in Europe or thousands of dollars. So take care. Really don't do that, because you are really you can really be in trouble nationally.
Yeah, thanks very much for that very clear answer. And just a reminder, for the access to space for all opportunities that involve satellite launch or satellite deployment opportunities, we do require that you are compliant to these processes, to the registration of the satellite on one side and to the frequency registration on the other side. So that's very important for us, even though a country might not be part of the registration convention. A question that goes to Alexandra. Thank you very much. It is usually debated whether the system of ITO for geostationary orbits is based on first come, first serve or not. Would you please elaborate a bit on this?
Well, it's not really first come, first serve. First come, first serve is a kind of nickname or a kind of shortcut to describe the ITU system, but it's not really like that. The first, as I mentioned in my presentation, we have for GSO, we have two systems, either coordination or a priori planning. A priori planning is based on the reservation a priori for each member states of a certain part of the GSO radio spectrum resources. So clearly this is not first come, first served. For coordination, this is not first come, first served in the sense that if you come first, you get something that the others won't get. That's not true. What it is that if you come first, the other ones will have to discuss with you how to use the frequencies and how to find a technical solution. So the next one will have to discuss with the first, and the newcomer have to discuss with the existing players. It doesn't mean that the existing players don't have any obligations with regard to the newcomer. They have the obligation of a good faith negotiation to find mutually agreeable solutions. The only point is that, of course, there need to be technical solutions. Otherwise, you cannot find any solution if it is not technically possible. So sometimes people say, yes, I can't put my satellite at this position because there is already a satellite. That's true. But this is not because the rule says that you can't put a satellite, simply because it's impossible to put two satellites exactly at the same place and use the same frequencies. So if you wish, this is not really first come, first served, but it's simply that if we are going to use frequencies and orbits in space, we need to acknowledge that you cannot put two objects at the same position, like on the Earth, I would say. Thank you. You are muted, Jorge.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that comprehensive answer. Another question from Uskorev. When will it finally be obligatory for all space objects to have a compulsory system of safe removal from orbit in their design, so that without this the object will not be allowed into space? At what level is the approval of international rules for all regarding space debris fighting now? I think that goes to Yukiko.
I am thinking this question is on active space debris removals. And in terms of that, in the Committee of Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, in the legal subcommittee, we have been discussing on the space debris mitigation and also the removal of the space debris. And this is in ongoing legal discussion. I also think that this removal has a lot of technological challenges, and in that sense, I have no answer when it will finally be obligatory, but I would say first there should be a technology fully developed that could safely remove, and then I guess there will be we is now talking about the legal aspects, but I think once the technology isn't there, it is also difficult to further discuss on the legal aspects to it. But COPOS is dealing with this matter right now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. I mean, there are a lot of ongoing in COPOS on this topic and the topic of sustainability of outer space activity. So we have to stay tuned, and new things will be popping up as discussions advance. What is the difference between, this question comes from Anne, and she has two questions, so I'm going to ask you both. What is the difference between the ratification status and signature only? And the other question is, the country that has not registered satellites can still be liable at the end. So first question on the difference.
So if I may, the ratification status and signature status is a question on international space law in general. So if you go into the Vienna Convention on law of the treaties, you will find the difference. It's quite simple. If you ratify it, you're obliged to comply to every article, let's say, in simple. And if you're signatory country, you are expected to comply the preamble, the main concept of the treaty. So that is the big difference. Thank you. But I'm not going to go into more legal stories, and I would stop in here.
Yeah, if I may just add something about the case of the radio regulations. The radio regulations in ITU, this is what we call an administrative regulations within our framework, and therefore in our constitution, any member state of the ITU that sign the radio regulations is deemed to have ratified it 3 years afterwards. Unless it has formally opposed. So this is a specific case which explains why the radio regulations is so highly ratified, is that we have automatic ratification in case of no opposition. So which explains also that why many countries are in fact part of the radio regulations. Thank you.
That's really great answer, and the difference between the two type of regulations and treaties. And I think that's all, which was a lot of questions, and I would like to thank you, Alexander and Yukiko, for your patience, and also for the audience to stay there, to having stayed there with us for the extra half an hour. I think it has been very interesting. We got a lot of very interesting questions, and there was a lot of interest in the topic. Thank you very much, and I'm sure, Alexander, you will get a lot of people from here. I invite you to actually attend the World Radio Communications seminar that Alexander was mentioning before, because some of the questions that you had, they are going to be explored also in very detail during those sessions. Without so much ado, thank you very much again, and Alexander and Yuki, if you would like to stay there for a second smiling so I can take a picture, so we get you on the social network. So 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to take another one, just to be completely sure that you are going to be happy with the result. 1, 2, and 3. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you all for your participation, and thank you very much, Alexander and Yukiko, for your presentation.
Thanks
really,
to you for the invitation.
Thanks, Alexander.
See you.
Bye all.
Bye-bye.
See you.
See you all.
Thank you. Mm.